Hazardous weather graphic today showing winter weather advisory continues for Kodiak Island until 8 p.m. this evening for the snow and blowing snow they've been having all day long today, and that'll continue until about 8 p.m. and actually begin and should improve actually by that time and then become a little bit better thereafter. Otherwise, on the river breakup outlook, this just came out today for March 17th. Most of the Alaska average potential for spring, most of Alaska's average potential for spring river breakup and snowmelt flooding. Exceptions are above average potential exists above the Yukon River, Upper Tanana Valley Basin, and areas of the Copper River Basin. And of course, we'll have more on this as we get in toward the month of April. And on the satellite imagery, you can see a pretty snappy storm pulled northwestward here in toward Kodiak Island today. That gave winds of 35 gusting 50 miles an hour across the area there. On up into the Barren Islands today with snow and blowing snow and several inches falling there across Kodiak Island, as well as the southern Kenai Peninsula area. And also some rain and snow moving into Prince William Sound and northern Cook Inlet, breaking out to some sunshine this afternoon. And some clouds moving into the panhandle today, but also some clearing occurring, especially earlier today. We can see this front really kind of breaking up as it got in toward the southeast coast, with the main part staying off the coast here. In fact, getting quite weak down along the southern panhandle area, or off the southern coast there in toward the Queen Charlotte Islands. Otherwise, mostly clear skies out here to the west again, right into Bristol Bay early on, but this band starting to spill some clouds into eastern Bristol Bay there, but a lot of clear skies out here over the western or eastern Bering Sea up to the Bering Strait, and still some light snow flurries going on, snow showers for the Alaska Peninsula, the eastern Aleutian areas. And rolling this through again, you can see that wound up really nicely there. And Portage Valley, or Portage Visitor Center, had, which is in Portage Valley, had peak wind gusts around 70 miles per hour today. So really a lot of strong winds associated with this system, along with the snow. That's pulling some warmer air in. Palmer in toward Anchorage, now up around 40 degrees this afternoon after the light snow this morning. And out to the west, not much. You can see some clouds over the Russian Far East extend down across Kamchatka Peninsula, but the Bering Sea storm-free, and that'll be the case until Sunday, as we'll see. But today, here's that 979 millibar low moving right on top of Kodiak Island currently. Front right through here, off the southeast coast, quite weak right through here with some just areas of rain associated with that, really not getting too far inland, maybe just grazing the coast. High pressure, mostly clear skies, north slope, on out to the Arctic coast, right on down into the Kobuk Valley areas, even the Yukon Flats, all the way back into the southwest coast. Lots of clear skies, some of that getting into the Perlofts today, and less in the way of snow shower activity, but continuing, but pretty light, and not really seeing any additional accumulations there for the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, drying out under high pressure here to the west. And for tonight, we'll see a weak front begins to push eastward there toward Shemya, and that too late tonight, but doesn't quite make it to them yet. And still some scattered showers of snow here over the eastern central Aleutian areas. And this low pulling now southwestward a little bit over the Alaska Peninsula. That'll bring some areas of snow into Bristol Bay and the peninsula tonight, and more of a rain and snow condition for Kodiak Island as that flow switches around to more of a east-northeast, or generally east, milder condition there, become a little more showery as well, so much lighter conditions. Again, that advisory ends at 8 p.m. this evening. Otherwise, not too bad up along the North Gulf Coast. Chance of rain or snow showers. Same thing, even less of that into Cook Inlet and the Susitna-Matanuska Valley. That front breaks up into two really weak troughs here. This one just about has no weather associated with it. The one back here to the west has a few snow showers with it. Not much change over the eastern Bering and on up to the north slope there in the Brooks Range area with high pressure holding. Look for some clearing over the panhandle. Chance of rain with this warm front as another system develops, kind of a double low structure here pulling northwestward. We'll see tomorrow, same pattern, moves right toward Kodiak Island again. Not quite as strong as the one today, so winds will be lighter, but still look for areas of snow with us into southern Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula again, snow or rain and snow, depending on your time of day and elevation, of course. And rain and snow increases along the North Gulf Coast. Possible gale force winds in advance of this front tomorrow. And again, most of this moisture staying off the southeast coast there, with the main flow pulling back to the west and northwest. High pressure keeping it dry with some sun breaks over the southeast coast, and most of the interior pretty nice, with most of clearing up there over the northwest and the North Slope, Brooks Range area. But you'll still see some sunshine at times, even in the Tanana Valley, and maybe a little bit more in the way of some clearing than what I've shown here over the Kuskokwim Valley into Bristol Bay, but still pretty nice, definitely dry. Nothing but high pressure out here to the west until Saturday, tomorrow. I think I went backwards. Yeah, tomorrow for Saturday. Okay, was low. Yes, I did. Okay. Let's pop ahead here. Interesting. Anyway, let's just go to temperatures. For the lows tonight, 30s to near 40 for the Panhandle, otherwise down around 10 degrees for the Copper River Basin. Mid to upper 20s here for South Central Alaska, mid 20s or upper 20s for Kodiak Island, and in the teens for Bristol Bay. Right around 0 either side there for the Kuskokwim Valley. Highs tomorrow, 35 to 40, or some cases even in the lower 40s here for the South Central Alaska area. Same thing for Kodiak Island, lower 30s Bristol Bay and the Copper River Basin, and 40s to near 50 for the Panhandle, followed by lows above freezing all of the southeast coast, and 10 to 20 over the interior here, 20 South Central Alaska, Kenai Peninsula, followed by highs 45 to 50 over the southeast coast, mid-30s in the Copper River Basin, and in the lower 40s here for South Central Alaska. Pretty nice conditions coming up on Sunday afternoon. Up to the north, 5 below to 5 above for the Tanana Valley, otherwise below 0, kind of cold again, North Slope, eastern Arctic coast. Highs tomorrow, up to 0 all the way to the North Slope there, and 20s to lower 30s for the central interior, followed by lows staying well above 0 in the Fairbanks area, low 15, 0 to 5 below or 5 above here up to the Brooks Range, followed by highs cracking freezing there at Fairbanks, lower 30s, lower to mid 30s for the mid and upper Tanana Valley, and for the southwest coast. Single numbers for the lows tonight, teens for the Pribilofs, otherwise 20s, lower 30s for the Alaska, or for the Aleutians. Highs tomorrow, mid-20s Pribilofs, mid-30s for Unalaska, lower 30s Alaska Peninsula, and we've got Sunday morning lows still on the chilly side here for the southwest coast, 5 to 10 degrees, right around 20 for the Pribilofs, upper 20s for Unalaska, lower to mid-30s for the Aleutians, and for the highs, mid-30s here for the Alaska Peninsula, 41 for Unalaska, mid-40s for AKwx.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, still some IFR here along the Alaska Peninsula, on up into western Chillicothe Strait, then VFR, Pribilofs up into the southwest interior, northward all along the west coast, Seward Peninsula, and across much of the interior, north and west of the Alaska Range. South of the mountains, though, some IFR down here, western Prince William Sound into the southwestern Copper River Basin, IFR western St. Lawrence Island, and back to the southwest, and the next front bringing some IFR into Chemillana by tomorrow morning. Otherwise, marginal VFR, some areas of IFR over the North Gulf Coast into the northern Panhandle. And for the afternoon, VFR for the southeast coast, area IFR with that next storm coming northward, and otherwise not too bad over southern Alaska on up into the Arctic Ocean, as well as eastern Bering Sea. Marginal VFR now, lost the IFR for the Alaska Peninsula, and that next front bringing a narrow band of IFR into the west central Aleutians, otherwise Adak and Atka marginal. For Saturday morning, that band advances eastward here, holding together enough to keep some IFR possibilities sliding into St. Paul Island by Sunday morning. IFR from Atka westward to the Komodorskis, IFR here over the western interior, some VFR showing up in the morning hours over the Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Valley, Cook Inlet, on up into the Tanana Valley, and IFR, Yukon Flats to the Brooks Range, and IFR over the Panhandle, improving out toward the coast. And then for the afternoon, big improvement here, mostly VFR for the southeast coast to Yakutat, lingering a little bit of IFR, western Prince William Sound, maybe into Valdez, otherwise marginal VFR and improving over southern Alaska. Interior pretty good, some scattered marginal VFR. And north of the Brooks Range, solid VFR for the North Slope and Arctic coast. Bering Sea, big area of IFR now, especially over the central Aleutians, up in toward the Pribilofs, and then back out to the southwest. Marginal VFR only making it up to Nunivak Island, St. Lawrence Island, and the Bering Strait, as well as the western Alaska Peninsula, but Kodiak VFR, as well as Bristol Bay. Passes and the Tuviganadegan tomorrow, VFR on either approach. And for Adigan, same forecast, there we go. Lake Clark and Merrill starting out VFR, and then deteriorating conditions throughout the day, especially in the afternoon, and in toward the late afternoon, possibly becoming IFR, especially on the eastern entrances. Rainy. It won't be, I don't think, quite as bad as soon. So VFR to marginal VFR late in the day. And again, the lowest conditions will be on the eastern approach and entrance. And for windy, staying VFR tomorrow. Isabel looks VFR, Mentasta as well looks VFR, with the moisture staying to the south at least through tomorrow afternoon. But Tanita, marginal VFR becoming IFR during the afternoon hours. And Portage, same pattern, marginal VFR becoming IFR in the afternoon. Chilkoot and White, though, staying VFR the entire day. And for the freezing levels, here still south of the Alaska Peninsula, kind of shifting eastward a little bit there, and then up into about King Salmon, right across northern Cook Inlet, Copper River Basin, 2,000 feet up along the southeast coast. And from there, taking a look at icing, we've got southeast flow, that next storm rolling on up. So by tomorrow afternoon, we're going to have possibly some considerable moderate rime icing into the Kenai Peninsula, mostly the southern, eastern Kenai Peninsula, western Prince William Sound, with isolated moderates spilling into Cook Inlet down to Kodiak Island, and then this mostly staying off the Panhandle. And for the wind flow here, upper level ridge holding that moisture back, and again the southeast flow also just pushing it mostly up toward the North Gulf Coast, Kenai Peninsula, about 90 knots. And out here to the west, 65 to, let's see, 90-knot northerlies here from the Yukon Delta coast across the Alaska Peninsula, and then westerly flow starting to break in, or breaking into the western Bering Sea, and 9,000 feet, 45-knot northerlies, so the north flow here really starting to wane, but still pretty breezy there for the Alaska Peninsula. Southeast 65 to 70 knots across the Gulf of Alaska. And at 3,000 feet, southeast 70 knots ahead of this low that's pulling northwestward, actually be pulling back toward Kodiak Island Saturday night. And turbulence, widespread area of moderate turbulence for the Panhandle up along the North Gulf Coast, advancing westward through the afternoon to the western Alaska Range. And after the break, I'll be back with a look at the marine forecasts.
Floating hundreds of miles from Earth, astronauts get a unique perspective of our planet. While they might recognize landmarks, space is the only place they can see the very edge of our planet's atmosphere.
From orbit, particularly looking at the horizon, did bring to mind how thin the atmosphere is. It's like an onion skin around this great big ball of the Earth.
This uppermost layer of Earth's atmosphere, the ionosphere, also overlaps with the very beginning of space. It's the job of NASA's new mission, GOLD, the Global Scale Observations of the Limmendisk Instrument, to study this region, a region that isn't just for astronauts to explore, but that affects humans every day down on the ground. For one thing, this layer of the upper atmosphere helps protect us from harmful radiation and energy emanating from the sun. But in our modern society, it does so much more. It affects the smartphone that sits in your pocket and the radio waves that guide our airplanes. The ionosphere is a crucial layer of the atmosphere through which our communications and GPS signals travel. And when this region changes, it impacts those communication signals. Changes can occur above this region from the sun's activity, also known as space weather. Changes can also occur below from Earth's weather, such as hurricanes and wind patterns. Gold connects the dots between how space weather and Earth's weather shape the upper reaches of the atmosphere. But this region isn't easy to study. The ionosphere spans roughly 60 to 400 miles from Earth's surface, which is too high for aircraft and scientific balloons, and the lower regions are too low to easily study with satellites. What are attainable, however, are the swaths of red and green light shining out from the upper atmosphere. Formed when the sun's rays hit atmospheric molecules, this light, named airglow, comes from green and red bands of glowing gas. Some of the airglow is invisible to our eyes, shining in infrared and ultraviolet light, which can only be seen with scientific instrumentation. Taking advantage of our planet's natural glow is gold. The gold instrument, which is about the size of a mini fridge, is hitching a ride on a commercial communication satellite, SES-14. The satellite's orbit lies 22,000 miles above Earth, where it can record images in ultraviolet light to monitor changes in airglow across the globe. These images give information on the temperature, density, and composition of particles in the upper atmosphere. Gold collects these observations faster than any mission has ever done before. It captures an image of Earth's entire disk every 30 minutes, allowing scientists to see how the upper atmosphere evolves throughout the day. Gold joins a host of missions studying the very nature of space, around Earth, the Sun, and planets. As NASA ventures farther and farther from home, knowing the nature of space itself is crucial for our journey to understand our solar system and beyond.
There's a new class of chemical compounds impacting the Earth's ozone layer and raising concerns among some scientists. But a new NASA analysis indicates stratospheric ozone could actually be impacted more by climate change and the continued release of already banned chemicals. The Earth's ozone hole is showing signs of recovery, decades after the landmark agreement called the Montreal Protocol that banned many chemical compounds harmful to the ozone layer.
So we know the Montreal Protocol was a huge success. This was signed in the late 1980s when scientists and policymakers from around the world gathered together to try to save the ozone layer.
The chemicals they regulated persist in the atmosphere for many decades. They thin the ozone layer and they create a seasonal hole over Antarctica. They basically take away part of our planet's natural sunscreen, and that increases the risk of skin cancer and damage to plants.
Scientists have projected the ozone hole could disappear almost completely by about 2075, but several factors could delay that recovery.
There are some industrial compounds that are not banned by the Montreal Protocol, but as they enter the atmosphere, they will also hurt the ozone layer.
But the unregulated compounds have a short lifespan in the atmosphere, unlike the chlorofluorocarbons that were originally regulated. So they have a short-lived impact on ozone, and we don't think they'll delay recovery by more than a few years.
We project that by 2050, more than half of the ozone-depleting compounds in the atmosphere will come from long-lived substances banned by the protocol.
Because these compounds stay in the air for such a long time compared to the unregulated, short-lived compounds, they will have a disproportionate and lingering impact on ozone. So any non-compliance with the protocol can have significant consequences.
And the really big uncertainty in ozone layer recovery is climate change. There are many naturally produced ozone-depleting substances that are emitted by the oceans. And as the oceans continue to warm due to climate change, those emissions will increase, and that will further delay ozone recovery.
Scientists want to better understand how climate change will affect ozone recovery.
This is a hard problem. As a scientific community, we need to work on this major issue. We now have a powerful new tool to simulate atmosphere and its interaction with land and ocean to study this issue. And that's what we're going to do.
How can you see the atmosphere? The answer is blowing in the wind. tiny particles known as aerosols are carried by the air around the globe. This visualization uses data from NASA satellites combined with our knowledge of physics and meteorology to track 3 aerosols: dust, smoke, and sea salt. Sea salt, shown here in blue, is picked up by winds passing over the ocean. As tropical storms and hurricanes form, the salt particles are concentrated into the spiraling shape we all recognize. With their movements, we can follow the formation of Hurricane Irma and see the dust from the Sahara, shown in tan, get washed out of the storm center by the rain. Advances in computing speed allow scientists to include more details of these physical processes in their simulations of how the aerosols interact with the storm systems. The increased resolution of the computer simulation is apparent in fine details like the hurricane bands spiraling counterclockwise. Computer simulations let us see how different processes fit together and evolve as a system. By using mathematical models to represent nature, we can separate the system into component parts and better understand the underlying physics of each. Today's research improves next year's weather forecasting ability. Hurricane Ophelia was very unusual. It headed northeast, pulling in Saharan dust and smoke from wildfires in Portugal, carrying both to Ireland and the UK. This aerosol interaction was very different from other storms of the season. As computing speed continues to increase, scientists will be able to bring more scientific details into the simulations, giving us a deeper understanding of our home planet.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Coastal water forecast here for the southeast coast. Light winds on the south coast and east to southeast winds at about 10 to 15 knots on the north coast. And the central northern inside waters, north winds at 10 knots. Clarence Strait, southeast winds 10 knots. And for the day on Saturday, actually, let me back up here to there we go. Let's go for Saturday. Gale warnings on the south coast for tomorrow, 35 knots, gusts 50 knots there, and then east to northeast winds 20 to 30 knots for the central and north coast. Lynn Canal, north winds at 10 knots, southeast winds 15 knots for the central and southern inner channels. And we already saw Sunday, so let's go to Prince William Sound for tomorrow. Northeast winds 20 knots, seas 4 feet, and northeast winds 30 to 35 knots for the North Gulf Coast. Southeast winds 25 for the Barren Islands. East winds 25 knots for Kamishak Bay. Southern Cook Inlet, north winds at 25. Northern Cook Inlet, north at 20. And then for Sunday, east winds 20 to 25 knots for Cook Inlet. Gale warnings Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands for southeast winds 35 to 40 knots. And for the North Gulf Coast, southeast winds 20 to 30 knots. And Prince William Sound, east winds 20 knots with 3-foot seas. Kodiak Island, northeast to southeast winds for Saturday at 20 knots. And for the Alaska Peninsula, northwest winds 25 knots. And Bristol Bay looking at a northeast breeze at about 15 knots. For Sunday, west winds here for the Alaska Peninsula, 25 to 30 knots, while Bristol Bay will be looking at northerlies at 30 knots with 6-foot seas. Kodiak Island, south to southeast winds, 25 to 30 knots. For the eastern Aleutians tomorrow, northwest winds 20 to 25 knots. Central Aleutians, Adak and Atka, northwest at 20. And for the western Aleutians, southwest winds 20 to 25 knots. Big increase in those winds on Sunday with that intense storm moving in. We've got southwest winds 55 to 65 knots with seas running anywhere from 30 to 40 feet. And for the southwest coast tomorrow, north winds 15 to 20 knots. Pribilofs, north winds at 20 knots. Variable winds at 10 knots for St. Matthew Island, and north winds 10 to 15 knots for Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island. And for the day Sunday, Light variable winds here, Norton Sound and the northern Bering Sea here, St. Lawrence Island to the Yukon Delta coast, but a big increase in the winds here, almost storm force winds coming into the St. Matthew Island area, southeast increasing to 45 knots, seas building to 15 feet. Pribilof, south winds increasing to 40 knots, seas building to 15 feet, and gale warnings developing along the southwest coast, south of Nunivak Island. And up along the eastern Beaufort Sea coast for tomorrow, east winds, only 15 knots. And for the central and west coast here, southeast winds at about 20 knots. And for the Chukchi Sea, southeast winds 10 to 25 knots. And the outlook for Sunday here for the Chukchi Sea, south to southeast winds 15 to 25 knots. Pretty light winds for the central and western Arctic coast, 10 to 15 knots, both out of the east. Then those easterlies increase as you head eastward here, looking at 20 to 30 knot winds, strongest over toward Barter Island to Demarcation Point. For tonight, again, not too bad for the southeast coast, basically dry, chance of rain around Elfin Cove to Yakutat, and improving conditions here across the North Gulf Coast into Kodiak Island as this low weakens and slides southwestward. Otherwise, just some chance of snow showers here over the southwest interior, dry in the north, dry and with light winds out over the northern Bering Sea. And this front here will bring a chance of snow across the let's see, for tonight and then tomorrow, let's see, there we go, bring some snow into the west central Aleutians, but nothing serious. And this low tracks northeastward here to south of Prince William Sound for another round of gale force winds, rain, and snow. Heaviest along the North Gulf Coast here, Prince William Sound, eastern Kenai Peninsula, again wrapping back down and around to Kodiak Island, lighter amounts inland, dry for the Tanana Valley, dry for the western and northern interior areas, and a chance of rain along the coast of the Panhandle. And then the big storm on Sunday, 957 millibar low pulls into the southwestern Bering Sea here. Very tight pressure field associated with it, bringing those hurricane force wind warnings and storm warnings into the western Aleutians and southwest Bering with good gales into Adak and Atka. Otherwise, fair and dry over much of interior Alaska. Chance of rain and snow showers for Kodiak Island. Thanks for joining me.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.